Part 2, God and His Personality. Chapter 1, What's God like and what's His character? There are three kinds of similarities and likenesses between God and man. The first similarity, as we already have seen, is that God looked like a man and man looked like God. The second likeness or similarity between God and man is the triune existence. I have discussed this similarity in the previous chapter. The third likeness is the emotional likeness. God has all the emotions that human beings have. In fact, human beings have these emotions only because God has them. Some of the philosophers of this world have said that God is without emotions. They taught that God is untouched by emotions like joy and sorrow. Now they have taught this with the good intention of exalting God, but the notion is totally wrong. The Bible clearly tells us that God has all the emotions that we human beings have. In fact, this lesson is not necessary for Christians who know the Bibles well. Any Christian who has a minimum knowledge of the Bible will automatically know that God has all the human emotions. Yet I venture to say once again what millions of saints already know, hoping that it will be helpful to at least some readers who have a newly found salvation in Christ. To begin with, let us recollect that most popular verse of the New Testament, John 3rd chapter 16 verse. It says, God so loved the world. Here we see that God has the emotion of love in his heart. In fact, love is the most dominant feature of the character and nature of God. Love in his nature is so powerful that the Bible declares God is love. If this wonderful emotion called love were personified, if love could take the form of an individual, that individual would be only God. That is what First John 4 chapter 8 verse means. Yet we must not think of God's love as we think about human love. God's love is vastly different from human love. We often hear about a young man falling in love with a girl. We also hear about purer and better forms of love, like the love between brothers or friends and the love that parents have for their children. But God's love is superior to all these kinds of love. Once we realize the beauty of God's love, we find every other love to be unattractive. First Corinthians 13 chapter tells us what God's love is. There is no selfishness in His love. God's love always craves to bless others, to make them happy, to do maximum good for them. True love does not expect to get something in return, but desires to give something to make others happy. Many men of God have written much about God's love, which is called agape in Greek. I need not repeat what's already been said. Yet we must remember that God has a heart that loves and that delights in loving others. Hatred is the opposite emotion of love. If God can love, he must be able to hate too. Many philosophers, theologians, and worshippers cannot digest what I am saying now, but I am presenting to you the truth that God hates too. So, just as we can say that God loves and rightly that God is love, we can likewise say that God also hates, but we cannot say that God is hatred. God hates certain things, but He is not the personal personification of hatred. Most certainly, as we have already discussed, He is the personification of love. The God is not hatred. God has a certain amount of hatred in his heart. Let me explain this notion. Love has a nature to love everyone and everything it comes across, but it will definitely reach a point where it feels it is wrong to love. Love must stop loving at a certain point and start hating to do justice to its own self. Love, as I said earlier, craves to do maximum good to the one whom it loves. But if there is something that hinders that maximum good, can the hindrance also be loved? For example, a mother loves her child immensely. Let us suppose a dog is about to bite the child. Will the mother love the dog? Suppose a snake is about to bite the child. Will the mother love the snake? Let's also suppose there is an infection in the child's body and he becomes sick. Can the mothers love the infection or the disease? You know the answer. The mother who loves her child can never love something that harms the child. If the mother truly loves her child, she must and she will hate everything that harms the child. The same principle applied to God. John 3rd chapter 16th verse tells us that God loved the world very much. That is true about not only our world but also every world in the universe. God created quadrillions of worlds and he loves all the worlds and all the people in them. Because of his immeasurable love, God intends to do maximum good to all people, but certain forces work against this interest. There are forces that harm the worlds and lead them to destruction. If God lowered the forces that bring destruction to people, that would be illogical, meaning God approves of what those forces are doing. If He loved the destructive forces, He would be helping them, working with them, refraining from stopping their destruction. Such a permissive and friendly attitude toward destructive forces ultimately goes against the safety and well being of God's creation. If God causes such a great harm to the people by showing love toward the destructive forces, He is not showing love to His people. That is the reason God must have certain amount of hatred to in His heart in order to make His love meaningful and effective. A love that doesn't hate those things that destroy His beloved is no love at all, but insanity. The Bible tells us what God hates: sin, injustice, falsehood, and hypocrisy. God hates these things because they hinder the maximum blessing He wants to shower on His children. For example, God is love, but He cannot love lies because He is holy and loves the truth. God is love, but He loves only good things. Then the Bible tells us that God rejoiced over certain things. When Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River, God the Father spoke from heaven, saying, "And behold, a voice from heaven said, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased and delighted.'" We have already seen in Jeremiah 9 chapter 24th verse that God rejoices in people who know Him. So we know that God experiences joy on certain occasions. The Bible also tells us that God experiences sorrow too. He knows what pain and sorrow are. In Isaiah 63 chapter 9th verse, the Bible says, "In all their distress he was distressed." God has the emotion of anger too. Some theologians do not like the concept that he is sometimes angry, but the Bible speaks about the anger of the God. In Isaiah 63 chapter 6th verse, God declared, "I trampled the nations in my anger." In Revelation 11 chapter 18th verse, the 24 elders said to God, "The nations were angry and your wrath has come." In Second Chronicles 36 chapter 16th verse, the Bible tells us they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his love. In Romans 1st chapter 18th verse, Paul tells us the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people. But God is also a compassionate person. He pities some people. Isaiah 63 chapter 9th verse says, "In his pity he redeemed them." And Isaiah 54 chapter 10th verse introduces God as the Lord who has commission. compassion on you. In addition to having emotions such as love, hatred, joy, and sorrow, God is sometimes vexed too. In Islam 95th chapter 10th verse, God Himself declared, "For 40 years I was grieved and disgusted with that generation." In short, we can safely conclude that God has all the emotions that a human being has. In fact, all of our human emotions are just a reflection of God's emotions. God even tells us, "I am a jealous God." The contemporary English version renders it better. "I am the Lord your God, and I demand all your love." As a husband demands all the love and attention of his wife, God demands all our love. He is not happy to share our attention and love with someone else or something else. In fact, God in His love has created those emotions in our heart so that we can understand His feelings, and so it is ignorance to think that God does not have any feelings. A God who does not have feelings and emotions is as good as a non existent God. If He has emotions, He will have preferences and desires, and if he has preferences and desires, it is possible for us to do something to please him. On the flip side, if he were without any emotions, it would not be possible for us to please him. In such a situation, godliness and service to God become meaningless and aimless. How can we worship and serve him if we do not know what pleases him? Theologians attempting to exalt God have drawn a wrong picture of God in our minds. If God is without emotions and feelings, all his actions are aimless and without purpose. That means we cannot be sure when he would be happy with us or when he would become angry. It is dangerous and every unsafe to live in a universe ruled by such an unpredictable king. Many have become atheists because of such foolish concepts of God. Theology born out of human wisdom drives people away from God instead of drawing them to Him. So let us be clear, the God of the universe has emotions like ours, and He has revealed in the Bible what makes Him happy and what stirs up His anger. Praise the Lord that we know how to please Him and make friendship and fellowship with Him. The beauty of God's nature. I have to tell you something before I can move on to the next topic. God is an infinite and eternal being, having all the human emotions, but the beauty of it is that all emotions of God do maximum good for all people because they are governed by three major principles: love, grace, and justice. God is love, so everything God does, He is done out of love. God is angry when we sin, so that we learn holiness and run away from sin. If we continue in sin, God will righteously angry and punish us. And even that punishing anger is an expression of love. He punishes one person for the benefit of the people around him. When God punished Ananias and Sapphira, we see that great fear seized all who heard what had happened. No one else would commit the same mistake. So we see that all God's emotions are governed by His love. All His actions are gracious. He sometimes punishes us so that we can escape disgrace and punishment in eternity. Psalm 25th chapter 10th verse tells us all the paths of the Lord are mercy and steadfast love. There is another important trust for us to note. All the actions and emotions of God are governed by justice and result in justice. We have said that God will be angry sometimes, but He is never unnecessarily or unjustifiably angry. He is never angry at innocent people. When God is angry, His anger will be 100% justifiable. God's anger is righteous anger. Human anger is often bad, sometimes going out of control and prompting actions that are harmful. This never happens with God's anger because His is holy anger. God never violates justice. He will always do the right thing. He is love, but He stops loving if His love would cause a loss or harm to His creation. All His emotions are well balanced and under His control. God is an emotional being, but He is not led by His emotions. His emotions are guided by intelligent principles. Even when God says, I am a jealous God, we should not think that He has something like human jealousy. Even His jealousy nature is justified. He demands all our love because He truly deserves it. That is why God is a perfect being. We love someone and our love becomes our weaknesses, but that never happens with God. God's love is His strength, not His weaknesses. Now, just because we said that God has all the human emotions, let no one think lightly of God. God is perfect in all his emotions and attributes. Let us revere him and worship him. Let us cultivate holy fear for God in our hearts. He deserves all our admiration, adoration, and worship. God even knows what parental love is. He is in fact introduced himself as a father. He delights to be addressed, loved, and trusted as a father. Psalm 103, chapter 13th verse informs us as a father has compassion on his children. So the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. Because God has all these emotions, we can fellowship with him, please him, and become his friends. In Isaiah 41, chapter 8, verse, God tells us that Abraham was his friend. Even we can be God's friends. How grateful we are that God is an emotional being with all the emotions in their ultimate perfection. The wisdom of God. Wisdom and knowledge are two different faculties. Knowledge is the sum total of all the data of information you have in your mind. For example, we know so many things about the world that surrounds us. All these things put together is our knowledge. God knows everything. There is nothing that He does not know. This is what we call God's omniscience. But wisdom is altogether a different faculty. Wisdom is one's ability to apply and utilize the available data of information for the maximum good of everyone. Not all educated people are wise. Some people are highly informed but are not wise. There are scholars in various branches of knowledge and science, such as chemistry, physics, and astronomy, who have enormous amounts of knowledge in their subjects, but when they have to make some important decisions in life, some of them make wrong decisions that harm their own interests. They judge people wrongly and adopt illogically and and unreasonable attitudes toward people. Ultimately, they bring great difficulties and losses upon themselves. As I said, they have knowledge without wisdom. Unlike knowledge, wisdom is a precious faculty that cannot be merely acquired. Knowledge comes from outside a person, but wisdom is inherent in a person. Knowledge becomes useful where wisdom is present, but it can be useless or even dangerous where wisdom is absent. Human wisdom is a person's ability to know what the maximum good is and the ability to achieve it. On the other hand, God's wisdom is his ability to achieve maximum good for a maximum number of people for the maximum duration of time. This is what we mean when we say God is wise. At present, our world is in a chaotic condition, full of sin, crime, sickness, and all kinds of other problems. There is no peace in the world. Looking at the present world, many intelligent people feel compelled to question God's wisdom. Often we hear people ask, why would God allow all these problems in the world? Why is He allowing evil forces to work even if He has reason to allow them initially? Why is He not controlling them to change the situation for the better? Even many intelligent thinkers are tempted to question God's wisdom, believing that God is not acting wisely. In fact, looking at God's actions from a human viewpoint, even we many times feel the same way. We are tempted to think that the origin of sin, the rebellion of Lucifer, the existence of a Satan in God's universe, God's allowing the serpent into the Garden of Eden, are all questionable actions of God. But in First Corinthians 1st chapter 25th verse, Paul makes a most intriguing statement. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. It is shocking that a saint like Paul could use the phrase, the foolishness of God. Does God have foolishness? Of course not. Then why is Paul talking about God's foolishness? Paul is trying to say that when God's actions seem to be foolish to our human wisdom, there is wisdom in those actions that is far above our human wisdom. The actions of God, which seem to be foolish, are actually wiser than the wisest of our actions. They seem foolish to us because of our failure to understand Him. God is ultimately wise. There cannot be a higher order of wisdom. Thus, all His actions are caused by the highest wisdom. In fact, God's actions are so wise that better actions cannot even be conceived. If we look at all the incidents in the history of our world and of the universe separately, each event appears to be meaningless and foolish, but there are all fragments in God's universal master plan. Thus, not every individual event may appear to be good. All the events collectively are undoubtedly working for the ultimate good of the universe and the worshipper. Romans 8, chapter 20th verse tells us, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. So, we see that God does everything to achieve, to achieve maximum blessing and maximum happiness for us all and for the maximum duration of time, all eternity. Praise be to God who is wonderfully wise